April 5th, 1968, Boston City Hall. It is just past 4 in the afternoon, and the mayor of the city has a decision to make that could get people killed. The night before, in Memphis, a single rifle shot had taken Martin Luther King Jr. off a motel balcony, and America had begun to burn. Washington was on fire. Chicago was on fire. Baltimore, Detroit, Kansas City. Smoke was rising over the capital of the United States, and federal troops were guarding the steps of the Capitol building itself. And in Boston, in a few short hours, 14,000 people, most of them young, most of them black, all of them grieving, were supposed to walk into the Boston Garden for a sold-out concert. Kevin White, mayor for barely 90 days, sat in his office and did the math no politician ever wants to do. Cancel the show, and you tell an entire grieving community that the city is afraid of them. Let it happen, and one spark inside a packed arena could put Boston in the newspapers next to Detroit. He asked for the file on the performer. He asked what kind of man he was dealing with, and the man he was dealing with had spent his whole life being underestimated by rooms exactly like that one. Here is what nobody tells you about that night. The mayor did not save Boston. The National Guard did not save Boston. The police did not save Boston. One man, in a green sequined suit, walked onto a stage in front of a city that was one match away from exploding. And before he sang a single note, he did something that no one in that building expected, something that made a room full of white police officers step backwards. What did James Brown do on that stage? And why did he almost refuse to do it at all? Stay with me, because the answer involves a fight over money that nearly canceled the whole thing. A fight so ugly that the mayor of Boston ended up screaming at him backstage. To understand why this night mattered, you have to understand what a James Brown show actually was in 1968. This was not a concert. This was a military operation. Brown ran his review with a discipline that would have impressed a drill sergeant. His band was, by common agreement, the tightest ensemble in American music, and it was tight because the man in front of it was a tyrant. He fined his own musicians a missed cue, a wrong note, an untucked shirt, a scuff on your shoe. Brown would flash a number with his fingers while still dancing, still singing, and that was your fine. $25. $50. The audience saw a man in ecstasy. The band saw a boss taking money out of their pockets in real time, on stage, in front of thousands. He rehearsed them until their lips bled and their fingers cramped. He demanded that every man wear polished shoes, pressed suits, clean collars, because he had grown up in Augusta, Georgia, shining shoes for spare change, dancing for soldiers, sleeping in a house that had been condemned. He had been arrested at 16 for stealing coats out of cars and sent away to a juvenile prison. He knew exactly how the world looked at a poor black boy from the South, so he built a machine so perfect that the world would have to look at him differently. He wasn't a nice man. Let's be honest about that. Ask the musicians who quit. Ask the ones who stayed and swallowed the fines. But he was something more useful than nice that April night. He was a man who understood power, who had it, who wanted it, and what it cost. Now go back to City Hall. Because the mayor of Boston, in a detail so absurd it sounds invented, was not entirely sure who James Brown was, aides had to explain to him that this was not Jim Brown the football player. This was the godfather of soul, the hardest-working man in show business, and to the young black community of Roxbury and the South End, he was not an entertainer. He was a king. The idea that saved the night did not come from the mayor. It came from a 29-year-old city councilman named Tom Atkins, the only African-American on the Boston City Council, and from a radio voice named Jimmy Bird, who knew exactly what the streets were feeling because the streets were listening to him. Their argument was simple, and it was brilliant. Don't cancel the concert, broadcast it. Put James Brown on live television for free all over Boston. Give the city a reason to stay indoors, sitting in front of a screen, together. Take the crowd that would have been on the street and put it in a living room. White listened, and then White panicked again, because a public television station, WGBH, would have to pull off a live broadcast from a hockey arena with borrowed cables and a few black and white cameras, with almost no notice. The go-ahead did not come down until roughly 3 hours before showtime, and even that was not the hard part. The hard part was still sitting in a dressing room underneath the Boston Garden, and he was not happy, because here is what the mayor didn't know yet. James Brown was not going to give the city of Boston his show for free, and the reason had nothing to do with greed. Understand the business he was in. In 1968, a black artist did not own his image, his masters, or his money. The industry owned all three, and it had been engineered that way. Brown had spent a decade clawing those things back one contract at a time. He financed his own tours. He paid his own band out of his own pocket. He had a rule that his people still talk about. He did not step on a stage until the money was in his hand, in cash, in a bag, counted. Not because he loved money, because a man who has been cheated once will never again let the paperwork decide whether his family eats. And on that particular night, there was a problem. Brown was under a non-compete arrangement tied to another televised concert, and a free live broadcast out of Boston stood to cost him roughly $60,000. In today's money, that's several $100,000. He learned about the broadcast almost by accident, from a station employee who assumed he had already agreed. He had not agreed. Nobody had asked him. Picture the room. Concrete corridor under the garden. Fluorescent light. The smell of cigarette smoke and floor wax and old ice. The mayor of Boston, a Harvard-polished politician in a suit, and the boy from the Augusta shoeshine stand, facing each other hours before the doors open. Brown wanted a guarantee. He wanted the city to cover what the broadcast would take out of him. And Kevin White, a man with a city on the edge, a man who had not slept, a man who suddenly understood he had no leverage at all, lost his temper and shouted that Brown would get his money. Read that again. The mayor of Boston, hours after the assassination of Martin Luther King Jr., stood in a basement and yelled at a soul singer about a bag of cash, and the soul singer did not blink. Because he had been in that room 1,000 times before, and he knew something the mayor had just figured out. Whoever needs the deal the most has already lost it. This is the part of the story that gets sanded off in the polite retellings. They tell you it was a night of unity and healing. It was. But it was also a negotiation, and James Brown won it, and he won it while the city was on fire. He made the establishment guarantee him in writing what it had spent 30 years telling him he didn't deserve. That is not a footnote. That is the whole man in a single hallway. So the deal is made, the cameras are up, and then comes the second gut punch, the one nobody planned for. 14,000 seats, 2,000 people. That's it. When word got out that the show would be on television for free, thousands of ticket holders simply stayed home. Some for refunds, some out of fear, some because a city in mourning does not put on its good coat and go dancing. Brown walked to the wings and looked out at an arena that was almost entirely empty seats. Rows and rows of nothing under the old garden lights, the smell of stale beer, the hum of an ice rink underneath the boards, every performer's nightmare. And on the biggest night of his life, he went out anyway, because whatever else he was the hardest working man in show business, and that was not a slogan. It was a contract he had signed with himself as a child. What happened over the next 3 hours is now preserved on tape, and you can still watch it. He gave them everything: the splits, the drops to one knee, the screams, the cape, sweat coming off him in sheets under 3 borrowed spotlights. 2,000 people made the noise of 20,000, and out in the neighborhoods, in Roxbury, in the South End, in Dorchester, in living rooms and bars and on porches, Boston watched. WGBH not only aired it live, they rolled tape and put it back on the air again, over and over, deep into the night, so that a man who needed a reason to stay off the street had one, at midnight, at 1 in the morning, at 2. And then the moment came that the mayor had lain awake dreading. Late in the set, the crowd broke. Young fans, kids really, began climbing up onto the stage to get closer to him, the way kids do. And white Boston police officers, exhausted and terrified and holding billy clubs, moved in fast to push them back. In that arena, on that night, 48 hours after the murder of Dr. King, a white cop putting hands on a black teenager in front of a live television camera was not a scuffle. It was a detonator. Everyone in the building understood what was about to happen. Everyone froze. James Brown did not freeze. He turned to the police, and told them to step back. He told them to get their hands off the kids, that he would handle it himself. And the officers, on live television, in front of the city they were sworn to control, backed away from a black man in a sequined suit because he told them to. Then he turned to the crowd. He didn't shout. He spoke to them like family and like a father who was disappointed. He told them they were making him look bad. He told them they were better than this. He told them that he was a black man too, that he had come up out of nothing, that he had made it, and that they were representing every single one of them tonight in front of the whole world. And the kids climbed down, every one of them, and James Brown counted the band back in. He'd fined men $50 for a wrong note. That night he fixed the biggest wrong note in America with nothing but his voice. Boston did not burn. Not that night, not the next. While the rest of the country counted fires, this city saw a Friday that was actually quieter than an ordinary Friday in April. Not one riot. Later, historians would look at the numbers and point straight at the garden. He said something else from that stage, and it was aimed directly at the mayor sitting a few feet away. He praised Tom Atkins for being, in his words, a black man in the driver's seat. He called the mayor a swinging cat. It sounded like flattery. It was not flattery. It was a man who had spent his life locked out of every room in America, standing in the middle of one, with the cameras on, with the city watching, with the police standing down, and putting his own people in the driver's seat, out loud, on television, in a city that had never once made room for them. That is what those two little phrases actually cost. That is what he was doing, and he had made them pay him for the privilege. The mainstream story hands you a warm little parable, the singer who calmed the city. It's true, and it's not the whole truth. The whole truth is colder and far more interesting. James Brown did not save Boston because he was sweet or gentle or safe. He saved it because he was the most disciplined, most ruthless, most feared operator in American music, a man who fined his own musicians mid-song, who never took the stage without the cash in his hand, who out-negotiated a mayor in a basement while the country was on fire, and who could look a line of armed police officers in the face and give them an order they obeyed. The industry spent 20 years telling him, a black man, couldn't own the room. On April 5, 1968, an entire American city handed him the keys to it, because there was no one else on earth who could hold it together. He wasn't a nice man. He was something the moment needed more. If this story hit you the way it hit me, subscribe and hit that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach the people who still remember when this music meant something. Tell me in the comments, do you think the city ever really gave him the credit he was owed? And stay close, because in the next episode, we go back into the dressing rooms, into the fines, the fear, and the night his entire band walked out on him over money. And what he did in the 24 hours that followed is one of the most ruthless things any musician has ever done. You won't believe who he called,